welcome to this month's edition of Slugger TV. We're coming to you from the Imagine Festival at the Accidental Theatre in the centre of Belfast. In this episode, we are going to be looking at reflections on local democracy. We are less than 60 days from the local government elections on May the 18th. And we are delighted to have a studio audience with us for the second month in a row. And to go through some of these reflections in local government, we are about to talk to two councillors who are about to leave the stage. We have Brian Heading, who is an SDLP councillor for the Colin area in Belfast. And we have John Kyle, who is an Ulster Unionist councillor in the Titanic area of Belfast. John, Brian, you're both very, very welcome to Slugger TV. Now, it's going to be a bit different than usual Slugger TVs. Normally we chew the fat about the month in politics, but you two have got a long career in politics. It's about to come to an end. It's a bit of Irish Wake style, I suppose. We're going down this approach. Brian, you were first elected in 2005, but you joined Lisburn Council in 2004. Tell us a wee bit about Lisburn Council when you joined it. Obviously, you then moved to Belfast with the reorganisation of local government. But when you first joined the council in 2004, what were your thoughts?
Well, it was the attending the first council meeting and being able to pick up, the do's and the don'ts and take directions from your group leader about any votes that were playing out that night. I must say it was a bit nerve-wracking because the first, I indicated that I wanted to speak on a particular topic, and the rule is that you have to get on your feet to address the mayor to do it. And typically, being a complete Democrat, I didn't get up on my feet, and then got this abuse from other councillors shouting at me, you had to get up, you had to get up. No one told me that that was a rule of the council and that you had to do that, but I learned very quickly then about it, how to get up, indicate to speak, and then get on your feet, and then say your bit.
Did you always know that you wanted to be an elected representative? I mean, when did you start getting politically active?
Now that's going back a right few years. I've been with the SDLP for over 30 years. To do it, I ran in an election in 2001 for Belfast City Council. I didn't make it at that occasion, but sort of kept my name circulating in the SDLP. So when a vacancy came up in Lisburn, they asked me would I take it on, and I said yeah, but I'd like to raise a few issues on the floor of the chamber to see whether you could get support for them, and that came about in late 2004. And then was lucky enough to get elected to represent the Murray Cross, as it was called then, the population there to do it, and be able to make a contribution to local government through that.
So you were an activist for a good number of years, first of all, in West Belfast, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Well, I was involved in a lot of the first SDLP campaign would have been 87.
That was before I was born, Brian. You'll be happy to know, yeah. So.
Well, back when we had horses and carriages, in that way back in 1987, to do that was the first political campaign that I got involved with the SDLP.
And that would have been for Joe Hendron, yeah?
Yeah, that would have been it. And then the local government elections were in 1989. I don't know whether you were born then or not.
I was a few months old. So.
A few months old. Well, you were being looked after. To do it, I was out pounding the streets for the SDLP in Upper Falls. As it was.
Before I move on to John, why the SDLP, by the way? Obviously, in the 1980s, just what made you look at the SDLP and think that they were the party for you?
It was first of all because it showed that politics was working. We remember back, in the history books and look at how bad the 1970s were and the 1980s were, and the politics or the lack of politics that there was then. To be honest, it was the achievement of getting the Anglo-Irish Agreement in '85. I would class myself as being fairly left-wing, like arguing about the economics and the social policy, and as you are aware, David, I've tried to raise those issues in Belfast City Hall in particular, but I was looking for a party that I could find a home for those ideas, and the SDLP provided me with one.
Okay, John. You succeeded, we talk about big shoes to fill, but you succeeded David Irvine after he very sadly died at the start of 2007. Yeah. What were your first thoughts going in? First of all, replacing someone like David Irvine, who there was a lot of outpouring of grief when he died and was seen as a big figure within loyalism. But what were your first thoughts when you walked into that chamber and sat down for the first time as Councillor John Kyle?
Well, I was a bit overawed by I must say, David, I mean, it was interesting when we met before, you know, quite often councillors have a meal before the council meeting because it can stretch until 11 o'clock at night. So, and in the eating area, so many people came over to me and spoke to me, said how much they admired David and, you know, wished me well, you know, right across the political spectrum. So when I came in, I was a bit overawed. I'd never been in the council chamber before. I'd never watched a council meeting, so I was completely, you know, wet behind the ears. And whenever they acknowledged my presence, I was here replacing David Irvine. I said, well, could I get up and speak? And they said, yeah, okay, go on ahead. And I got up and just said how honoured I was to be there. You know, how I had admired David and respected the contribution he'd made, and I look forward to serving the people of East Belfast. And then I sat down again. I didn't realise you don't do that. You see, nobody else, in all the 16 years, nobody else, when they've been co-opted on, have been asked. It was like, you know, your acceptance speech after an election. But everybody was very gracious and didn't blink an eye, you know, and just let me go ahead and do it. But I have to say I was quite nervous. I mean, for the first 2 or 3 years, I was as nervous as a kitten before the council meetings, you know, and you looked around and a lot of these, you know, household names, you know, big hitters who were you know, some of them were MLA, some were MPs, you know, and those were the days where people, you know, did 2 or 3 jobs. So it was a really fascinating experience to watch these people who I'd watched on TV, you had read about in the paper, and see how they operated in the chamber, you know, how they debated, how they interjected, you know, how they did what they wanted to do. So that was fascinating. But I was aware that, you know, David, I mean, I was not replacing David. You know, I couldn't replace him. So I was there as John Kyle to make whatever contribution I could do. But I'd entered into politics because of, at least I'd joined the Progressive Unionist Party because of my admiration for David, because I thought he was a breath of fresh air, a really, you know, original thinker, a man who was very committed, a man who I think epitomised some of the best aspects of politics in this place. And so therefore I joined to support him, you know, to just give whatever support I could. And then I found myself being asked by the party to replace him on council. Did you always want to be, when you joined the Progressive Unionist Party, did you always want to be an elected representative? Was that something that you always, because you're a GP as well, we were talking before we went on there, a lot of well-known politicians have been GPs before, whether it's Joe Hendren, Alistair MacDonald, and many others have been GPs before. So. Yeah, it's a useful job to have if you want to get into politics. I hadn't actually, I mean, David had said, look, I've got too much on my plate. Would you stand in my place in East Belfast at the next election? That would have been, what, 2005, 2006? And I'd mulled it over and said, no, David, I don't think that's me. And I turned it down and said, okay, that's fine. That was the type of man he was. He wouldn't force you into anything. And I said no. And then afterwards, I sort of regretted not doing it because I thought I hadn't joined the party to be an elected representative. It was more to support what I thought was a very valuable contribution to the Northern Ireland political scene. But afterwards, I sort of regretted then not standing. And then when he tragically died, you know, the party asked me would I stand. And I said yes, I would be. I would be delighted and honoured to do that. Yeah. And Brian, obviously in Lisburn, it's a very different dynamic from the council that you're in now. I just want to go through a wee bit of that because you became the mayor of Lisburn Council. Again, you were there. But people, how you got the mayoralty then, it was very different to the way the mayor of Belfast is allocated today. So walk me through a wee bit about how you put together the coalition to get yourself to become mayor, who backed you, and then what did you think, because Lisburn's a very unionist council area, it was then, whereas Belfast is much different, but we'll get to Belfast in a sec. Well,
well, first of all, the hunt wasn't enforceable in local government. There was, what usually happened was there was a lot of negotiations, because there's not just the civic role of mayor and deputy mayor. There were chairs of committees, vice chairs of committees. nominations to the other bodies. So there, when you add it all up, there was a fair bit to be allocated. Now, I had already done 2 years in Lisburn as chair of the Leisure Services Committee, and then stepped down in 2009, and then the initial offer that had been agreed with the other parties was that you go for deputy mayor. And I served as deputy mayor in 2010, 2011. And oddly enough, the tradition in Lisburn was that if you were in the office of deputy mayor, that was your apprenticeship, and to move on to become mayor. And although there was, when I was nominated for deputy mayor, I was panicking in the morning that was going, to see whether everything fell into place. People were going to keep their word about proposing and seconding and voting. And then it was actually a further issue then when it became mayor, because you didn't know whether somebody was going to suddenly say, actually, we don't think so. There's one of our people could do that better, so we're now withdrawing our support from what was agreed to do it. But on the day, I managed to get the Alliance Party to second my nomination on it, and a party colleague then nominated me on the day. So I became the second non-unionist mayor of Lisburn. So it was a bit of a step into the wilderness, maybe, for some of the unionist parties to take a risk with me to be mayor. And I think, you know, I certainly fulfilled my civic duties, with the exception of having an inaugural dinner, because I couldn't. It was just coming out of the financial crisis. And there were daily reports about, shops, retail closing, job losses, the hardship that people were feeling. And the tradition was that the Lord Mayor had an inaugural dinner, and I couldn't. I talked over with family members and with members of the party, and I said, look, I'm going to cancel this. It's saving money for the council on the one hand, and there's people that were enduring hardship to do it. I mean, there was a food bank in Lisburn. The highest house prices in Northern Ireland are actually in the Lisburn area, and yet we were running a food bank at the same time. And the Citizens Advice Bureau, a guy called Martin Bush, spoke to me about it and said, well, it's actually not what you would expect. It's not people on benefits that are looking at the food bank. It's actually people who are in negative equity, may have been made redundant. And when it comes to the third week in the month, they're finding things are getting a bit tight. So they went along to the food bank, were given a voucher, and were able to get whatever they needed. So I cancelled.
How did you find, because obviously you've mentioned it, you're quite left-wing, right?
Not quite, just left-wing.
Yeah,
left-wing.
so how did you, because obviously being mayor, you have to do there's a bit of pomp and ceremony with the role. Mm-hmm. How did you find that? Because I'd imagine in Lisburn, in particular, there would have been a lot of particularly, engagements that would have been of that nature.
Well, I'm glad you asked me that, David, because one of the things that happened during my term was that the local government workers decided to go out and strike. So, being having a left-wing view, I decided that I would cancel all my engagements for the day, and actually went out that morning and joined the staff in Lisburn Council who were out on strike to do it, and spent a morning. And you had great bacon buddies when you're on a picket line at one of the council facilities. So I think I was able to keep my own principles, and I was able to do what was expected of me, which was to represent the city at any other event that that was in the year.
And John, obviously, for you going into Belfast, it was a very different environment. There's a lot more parties there, but obviously you were in one of the smaller units. I think PUP only had 2 seats when you went into it, when you joined in 2007. Maybe did it 1 or 2?
2, yeah. Hugh Smith.
Hugh Smith was the other councillor.
Yeah.
And your smaller party, obviously the DP, Sinn Féin and Alliance were coming into the role, and the SDLP and those units were much bigger then. What was it like being in a smaller unionist party, just 2 seats? Did you find you were dismissed, or did you actually find on a couple of key votes, your 2 votes actually did make the difference?
Yes, that didn't happen very often. Now I must say, it was great being a smaller party because you had more opportunity to do things. There's only two of you, so therefore one or other of you had to do it. So it did give me lots of opportunity to do things, to try things out. Hugh was a really experienced, he was an old hand, you know, he'd been there for years and years and years. The difficulty with that was sometimes that when you're a new councillor, he knew all the shortcuts. So I'd go to him and say, Hugh, what do I do about this? He said, look, ring that person there. And I would do it, and that was sorted out. But then you didn't really know the proper way to do it, you know, how this system works. So whenever he went, I had, it's amazing how much there's to learn about how a city works and how council works. So I remember being on council for about 5 years, and I said to Michael Brown, who was the Sinn Féin party group leader, said, boy, there's an awful lot to learn about how councils work. And he said, tell me about it. You know, and he'd been there much longer than me. So the politics in local government is complicated in how it works. So it was great being a small party. It was great having Hugh, who'd seen it all before and done it all. But it would have been helpful to have a proper apprenticeship where you learnt really how things were supposed to be done before you learnt the shortcuts.
So this moves me on now to Belfast City Council as we know it today. Obviously, 2014, Brian, you moved down to Belfast. Colin, your DA is created, and you move into Belfast. John, obviously, you already were there. I'm going to ask John first of all, what did you make of some of the newbies like Brian who were, because I remember that shadow period between 2014, the councils didn't come into operation, super councils, until 2015, so there was that apprenticeship you talked about. And I remember some of the sitting Belfast City Council councillors weren't always too happy that the new councillors didn't seem to understand the procedures of Belfast City Council, and where maybe I remember there was an irritated councillor who stood up and said that some of the councillors were bringing some of the bad habits from the older councils into Belfast. What did you make of these newbies like Brian rocking up to Belfast?
Well, the double jobbing thing came in there, and a lot of the old hands disappeared. So there was quite a change over a lot of new faces. But you know, it was a breath of fresh air as well. It was it was good. But it took you a while to get the measure of people. You know, you got used to. I mean, you know, everybody has seen Sammy Wilson and knew that. Well, that's why Sammy operates. He gets up to speak. He's got 3 points. He speaks like a preacher. You know, that's Sammy. But then getting to know the new faces and people was interesting. And I remember some of the Alliance councillors from Castlereagh were very prickly when they came in, and I think it's because Castlereagh was a very combative council and they were smacked down all the time. I remember people saying, look, you don't have to be so prickly, you know, we'll talk about this, let's talk about it. So it did take me a bit of time to get a measure of the way Belfast did things. Peter McNanny had gone at that stage. I think Suzanne had come in.
Just came in, yeah.
Yeah. Peter was a great chief executive, you know. Suzanne was very capable and very able, but it was a different style.
Yeah. So
we were all, again, just learning how to adapt to our new responsibilities and to the new personnel. But it was, I think it was a good transition. I think those were 2 or 3 pretty good years, and the council worked well, actually. And
Brian, when you were moving into Belfast, obviously it must have been a world away from what you were used to in local government.
Well, the obvious thing in Lisburn is that you have a horseshoe-shaped chamber, so that it isn't. You are face on to some councillors, but the old chamber in Belfast is modelled on the House of Commons, and it is a case of unionists are those who support the union are on one side, and those who would like to see constitutional change occupy the other seats. And so that was different. And yes, I had a bit of experience in Lisburn. So for example, I was used to getting up and speaking. I knew how to bring a motion to council and things like that. But that year, like John of 2014, the council actually got new powers. Yeah. So we all had to learn about planning. Yeah. It wasn't a matter now of just raising an issue with the planning officer. It was the council that were responsible for planning within the city, and I think that transition year was an education for everybody who was on the council.
Yeah.
For my sins, I cover the monthly council meetings in Belfast, and they do seem to get very long. They do seem to have a lot of speeches, and motions aren't as much anymore because they changed the orders of that. But just some reflections from you, John, on that. Do you enjoy those long debates? I mean, you are older, you will stay through an entire council meeting. Some of these council meetings, by the way, go on for 5-6 hours, and sometimes they've run out of time and they have to come back the next day because the meetings go on for so long. Do you enjoy those debates? Do you think they serve a purpose, or are you a bit of an old cynic like me and think you can do your business in a much more efficient way?
Well, yes, you can do your business in a much more efficient way, David, but I still think democracy thrives on people being able to have their say and being able to engage. I was very opposed to at least I thought the online council meetings were very poor, actually. You know, it didn't.
This is just for anyone who isn't aware, during COVID.
During COVID.
And Belfast City Council held to that a bit longer than most other councils.
They did longer than I think we ought to have. I think we ought to have moved back much sooner than we did. And I suppose as someone who was a bit COVID cavalier, I would say that. But the quality of those meetings, I think, was definitely inferior to being in the chamber. And I think, I mean, sometimes, you know, you sort of are losing the will to live, you know, with somebody, all this talking. But at the same time, I think that is necessary for democracy to function healthily. People need to have their say. And even if you're rolling your eyes, not again, basically it needs to be done. You've got to go through it, I think, in my opinion.
Okay. Brian, what do you think about those meetings?
I'd agree with John. You know, it is a democratic forum. The councillors there have a mandate. Yeah. They may, and if a constituent raises something with them and it should be brought to the attention of the other councillors, then you should be entitled to do it. Yeah. What we have now is that there is a closed meeting. It's not open to the public, by the way, where the decision is made as to whether an issue is going to be addressed by a full council meeting or not. Now, if you take everything that's gone on in the city to do it, and you take particular issues, it has to be very, very important now. It has to almost be scored in how important it is before it gets to the floor of the chamber. Now, admittedly, you know, as far as giving speeches, we all like to get up and hear our own voice to do it, and sometimes do it. But I think overall the quality of speakers within the Belfast City Council, mind you, there is a silent minority in there who have never spoken at a council meeting, never raised an issue, never brought a motion to council. You know, and that's, you know, that I think they're letting their electorate down when they do that.
Go ahead, John.
I was just going to say the average age of councillors now is much slower than it was when I joined, which I think is a very good thing. But you do need that sort of institutional memory. You need the experience. You need people who've seen it all before and know, well, we can try this again, but it's not going to work. I'll tell you now, it's not going to work. So you do need that mix. But there are some very able young councillors on council, I must say. I think that's healthy. I think that's what we do need to have.
Well, Belfast City Council after 2019 became much more diverse in terms of just parties there. Yeah. You saw the Green Party increase its strength. You saw People Before Profit increase its strength in 2014. John, your ex-party, the Progressive Unionist Party, had a good election. They gained ground as well. So the parties, it's become much more alliance, have strengthened their position in the council as well. In terms of the number of parties in there, Brian, I'll go to you first on this. Do you think that's a real positive thing? Because I think I know Belfast City Councillors often like to tell me it's the most diverse elected chamber in Northern Ireland, which is true. It's got the most parties of any. So what do you think about it? Is that been good?
Well, I think that is a good thing, because at the end of the day, the election is how you measure what people are thinking out there. And you brought up about the Greens doing it. They had one councillor in 2014 to 2019, and then they came back with 4 to do it. And I think it showed that, particularly with the message that they were giving out, and a message that has now been picked up by other parties, because we all had to learn about green politics. We all had to learn about the environment, about climate change. We formed, the SDLP proposed that the council should establish a climate change committee. The Greens brought a motion to say that that we should declare a climate emergency. So there was by making it more diverse, it actually added to the education of other political parties and other individuals in the chamber.
And John, what do you think about the arrival on the scene of some of the newer parties and the greater diversity of Belfast City Council?
David, my take is that it is better to have multiple parties. I think that's a strength of the council. I think that when Stormont reduced the number of MLAs, was it from 108 to 90? I think that was a real mistake. Actually, I think that some of the smaller parties were squeezed out, and the greater the number of parties, the more minority voices can be represented. And I think a healthy democracy needs people who are in a minority to have their voice heard. And I think you avoid the old, the two main party system. I think is very restrictive. People's choice is very limited. Yeah. Whereas if you've got 6, 7, 8 parties, people have got choice, and on a single transferable vote system as well, it allows you to influence those minor parties as well. So I'm a big supporter of that. Mm-hmm. I think we need to ensure that there is that spread of political opinion represented.
So before I go to the audience, I've got 2 final questions. So for any aspiring councillors out there, for any people who want to become councillors, or for anyone who's maybe just started off in the past year, 2 years, maybe they've been co-opted into a council, what's your advice to them? What's the thing you enjoyed most about being a councillor? What's the thing you disliked the most as well, Brian? So I'll start with you.
It's about being able to bring an idea or a proposal to the council and get the other parties to support it. I mean, from my experience, it is the Million Trees project, to plant 1 million trees in Belfast over 10 years. That was brought by 2 parties, the SDLP being one, the Alliance being the other, to do it, but we got the support of the other parties. So when you get that, you get a buzz, and you say, well, I've done something. Mm-hmm. The other speaking personally, it was and identifying my Labour politics. It was when we had the issue about the threat of closure of the shipyard. And
just for context, this was you ended up speaking on top of a bus, wasn't it?
No,
outside City Hall.
It was a fire engine. Actually.
A fire engine. There we go. With your loud hailer.
Because it was the workers from the what we did was we arranged for a special meeting because John signed the petition to have the council hold a special meeting to discuss the closure. And what happened was the workers walked from the shipyard, from the gates of the shipyard. They came down to the City Hall. They went into the gallery with their high-vis jackets and the helmets and everything else on. We actually got, from memory, we got 3 of the workers to address the council on it. And then there was a motion put to the council calling for the government to take steps, which ended up having a conference call between political representatives and the trade unions with the Secretary of State the very next day. And it showed the weight of when Belfast made a decision to do it, that the government had it picked up and listened to it, and we were able to get some movement on on trying to find a buyer for the shipyard, and was successful in that.
And what do you dislike the most about being a councillor? What's the downside? There must be a real intrusion into your personal life. There must be a real take. What is it you won't miss? Let's put it this way: when you walk out of there after May 18th.
Look, I will miss an awful lot about it. To be honest, but if you get elected as a public representative, then you have to be available to the public. And sometimes, if you have the mobile phone on and you're out having some time with the family, or in the middle of doing something else, and the phone goes and it's somebody asking about something to do it, you know, about, you know, there's a bin hasn't been lifted,
Yeah.
or what's the council doing about this, or I went to the leisure centre doing, or, you know, I'm interested in that programme the council are doing. And you need to have access to the information to do it. You need to be able to say, listen, I'll phone you back in 10 minutes and I'll make another phone call and get you that information that you need, or find out why your bin hasn't been lifted.
Okay. John?
Okay, the thing that I enjoyed, or one of the things that I enjoyed very much, was getting to know the community in my constituency, just going into community organisations, churches, schools, meeting people. And to be a councillor, it helps if to like people. It's like being a GP. It helps if you like people, and then you get much more buzz and satisfaction. You meet them, you listen to them, you discover what some of the fantastic people that there are out there doing great work. So I loved that, getting to know the organisations, getting to know the characters, getting to know the people in the local community. That's very rewarding. And then you find that people tell you, you know, well, in fact, you ask them, you start off by listening, you know, what's not working well here? What do you need? What are the problems? What's really winding you up? And then you begin to learn what's going on. And then the other thing is when I then, you know, I would ring up a statutory body or statutory office or something. I say, it's Councillor John Kyle here. I want to go speak to so-and-so. And they'd put me through. Whereas if you were a resident, you rang up and you'd get, okay, somebody will get back to you on that, and you might not hear anything.
Yeah, that's right.
But because you're an elected representative, people always came back to you, and you always got an answer. And that was great, because I felt I actually can do something for these folks. You know, I do have some agency here to advocate on their behalf. I think that's a really rewarding thing.
Yeah.
What I liked least was at 9 o'clock in the evening, the phone would go and say, hello, Councillor Kyle, this is BBC Northern Ireland here, or this is Radio Ulster. I thought, oh no. I said, would you mind coming in for an interview tomorrow morning on Good Morning Ulster, whatever. And it's not that I dislike doing interviews, but I knew I'm not going to sleep tonight. My brain is going to be going round and round. I'm going to try and work out what am I going to say, what am I going to be asked, and that, you know, you just think, oh no. But then usually when you did it, it was really quite rewarding to do the interview, especially if you were well briefed. I remember one night, I got it Sunday night, and I was on Parks and Leisure, and I phoned up Suzanne Wiley, and she was just an assistant director. I said, Suzanne, I'll be interviewed tomorrow morning on this issue. Can you give me just some information? And she just went off the top of her head, bang, 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 bang. That's what you need to know, John. I mean, she was really impressive. And I went in, I was really confident, did the interview because I had all the information. But that phone call was on, I thought, oh no.
Yeah.
You know.
Brilliant. Brian, I know you wanted to come back in on that.
It's one of the things, you know, meeting interesting people in your DEA or your constituency, you know, we learn from them, not just about the issue, but they may have already covered. I mean, I became very involved in the campaign against fuel poverty, but it was constituents that were telling me and explaining to me and showing me what the problems were, and more importantly, getting the solutions to dealing with fuel poverty. The other thing, you know, that I can claim credit for is when the SDLP brought a motion to conference, and you'll remember this, David, to stop the Lord Mayor going to visit Donald Trump.
Donald Trump, I remember this, yeah.
Yeah, to do it, and we were able to get that through the council, and I've never darkened the door of the White House since then.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so we're going to throw it open to our audience now to ask a question. If someone wants to raise their hand, we'll get a microphone to you.
So I'm going to abuse the position of being the first questioner and ask it in two parts. Both of you expressed politics of left wing and sort of viewed people's circumstances of living probably ahead of most other political issues at the time. Could you honestly say that you feel that Belfast City Council since 2014 has improved the standards of living for people, and maybe you'll identify a certain measure? And John, I just want to know, how did you manage the fallout over the flag protest and your constituency's confidence in Belfast City Council after the measure was taken to remove the flag and fly it on designated days? Was there a crisis there between, for you, prioritising your left-wing politics at council but reassuring the constitutional position for many of your constituents?
Yes, I mean that was a crisis in the real sense of the words. We had rioting, certainly in my constituency, so it seriously damaged community relations, and it seriously damaged people's attitude toward Belfast City Council. Now, I think we have largely recovered that, actually. I think it's taken patience, a lot of work. Unionism, loyalism in particular, feels that their culture is being undermined and is, that people want to, suppress their, what they would say is cultural rights and their cultural identity. So there is an ongoing issue there, and I think that's what happens when you live in a contested society. When there are politics that are polar opposites almost. So you're going to have tensions. You're going to have disagreements. You're going to have different priorities, but I think that in terms of community relations, we've moved forward in terms of trying to create a culture in which people's views are treated respectfully, even if we disagree with them, treated more respectfully. I've tried to do things across the chamber. I've found the SLP very cooperative. I think that we've done some good things together. Let me just give you an example. What I look back on with most pride is the motion to cap the maximum wager in the fixed odd betting terminals, the FOBTs as they were called, and it was to be capped at £2, I think, and they were described as the crack cocaine of gambling, very addictive machines, because there's a big payout very, very rapidly, or potential for that. And it was the SLP, Donald Lyons, who seconded that motion for me. And it was particularly effective because the publicity that it gave, the problems around gambling addiction, problem gambling, the major gambling companies, before legislation was passed, they said, okay, we will enact that, even though we're not legally obliged, we will enact that cap and cap the maximum bet. So we achieved that. We did it on a cross chamber motion. And I think that was working together really well. But I do find that we can, descend into really sectarian name calling, but by and large, we try to interact in a respectful way, and that then gets transmitted to your constituents. And we've tried to again to support loyalist communities in developing their culture, in having opportunity to explore ways to celebrate their culture, to do different things. We've had our difficulties, with bonfires, etc. in the past, but I think that we've made real progress on that, actually. And I think that loyalist culture is richer and more confident now than it was back in 2012, 2013. So it took time to regain that ground, but we've done it, and we've managed to do it because other parties have supported unionist parties as they've wanted to show ways to encourage and support working class communities on both sides of the chamber.
Brian.
It's it's a hard thing being a public representative, but I think we try to the best thing that we can do is influence. We can either influence civil servants or we can influence the assembly. A point has to be made that local government has never collapsed because there's been a fallout between when there's been nobody at home and Stormont. Yeah. Local government got on with the job and got on with the responsibilities that it's had. And John's right, there has been times when things have got heated in the chamber, but simply because there isn't an assembly. running. So something is said, or a point is made, or an accusation is made, and we end up having 5 or 10 minutes of point scoring from it. But 99 days out of 100, the Belfast City Council to do it, and the SDLP has a tradition of trying to work with other parties to do it. And it can be from it. Sometimes we don't get agreement. From it we can't get an agreement on it, but at least we've said is, look, this is what something that we think should be done. We need it. Here's an issue that we think the City Hall should have an opinion on. So we're bringing a motion to this, and we're asking for all party support on it. And I'm glad to say that in anything that I've raised or brought on the council, it hasn't divided the council down orange and green. What it has done is it's actually brought a nice tinge of red to the chamber, and we've actually got collaboration on it, because it's about fuel poverty. It's about keeping our National Health Service going and making sure that it's sustainable and that it gets the money it's need. It's about education and making sure our children have access to good quality education and the qualifications that they need to become part of the workforce later. And I'm particularly pleased that as I bid farewell in May, that I can say, well, at least I've done something, or I've raised something, or I've got the council to take an issue up and raise it with a government department.
And I just wonder, for both of you, what does it mean that the Assembly isn't there? I mean, what void is there?
I think the absence of Stormont is a real problem. I think that public services are suffering. I think that the need to have a budget, to have a programme for government, to have specific strategies and action plans that you're implementing to move the country forward, to deal with problems as they arise, that the absence of Stormont causes real complications in that regard. So we definitely need it. I think also that does leave a political vacuum of a certain sort. As Brian said earlier, I think Belfast City Council, I think local government has done a magnificent job to try and fill that gap, but it can't completely fill it. I think the fact that there is disagreement at the Stormont level permeates down into communities, and people get more divisive and fractious, and annoyed with each other, and more polarised. Part of your political responsibility is to give leadership, and part of the leadership we give is to say, look, we can't agree, but there are issues that we need to tackle together. We're going to find some sort of compromise to tackle these problems, and we're going to do it as an elected body, or as a city, or as a country. We're going to tackle these. So where you've got an absence of functioning legislature, then that is an issue. And people in their daily lives may not be aware of it, but there are problems under the surface that are growing and that need dealt with and are being missed, and that's not a good thing.
Okay, and I've got one final question for you both. Obviously, we're about to head into a campaign. Did you enjoy campaigning when you were having to do you see? I get the great part of campaigns because I get to sit in nice warm studios and get to pontificate about what went wrong and what went right, and if you'd only listen to me, is it all be okay? But Brian, for you, are you going to miss being out knocking doors and having your posters and your face on the leaflets?
Well, I don't know about the posters end of it. I know that when you're in I'm sure it's the same for all parties, but the team that you have with you to that they're supporting the party and they're supporting you to secure that seat and to secure the vote that you're going to get. So you always have a funny story about something, an incident that happened while you're out canvassing. You always know to avoid the houses that have dogs. And even some of the the letter boxes can leave you with an industrial injury, at the end of it. But it's good crack. It certainly lose a bit of weight, which I'm looking forward to do over the next couple of months, with helping my colleague that's replacing me in the Colin area, a great guy called Jared MacDonald. But the yeah, I miss that. But I've got a good selection of books for future elections that I can maybe join you in the studio.
Maybe. And John, what about you? Will you miss going out around Titanic, knocking doors and having your face?
Well, it's a love-hate thing. I did enjoy it, David. But you had to get into it initially, and then once you got into it, it was really hard work, but it was enjoyable. Now, I stood in 5 elections, 3 for Belfast City Council, which I was elected each time, then twice for Stormont, and I didn't get elected either time. And there's nothing worse than being in the hall where they're counting the votes, and you're watching your votes, and you think that's not enough. And at a certain point, I think, oh, I've had enough. I'm out of here. It is so depressing. And actually, just to say, if people are thinking of standing for election, to stand, it takes courage to stand for an election. And secondly, if you don't get elected, it is a real dunt. It really knocks the stuffing out of you. But resilience is saying, okay, I gave it my best shot. I didn't get elected, but I'm not going to be put off by that. I'm going to come back and try again. And it does oftentimes take that resilience to actually make a success of it.
Yeah, and you're right, it does take a lot of courage to actually run. That just leaves me just to say, not just thank you for taking part in the programme, but Brian, John, thank you for actually all the work you've done in the council as well. I've sat there since 2014 watching the two of you, and the two of you have worked hard, and your constituents were very ably represented during that time. So thank you very much for all the work that you've done on the council. And that leaves me just to say thank you to our audience for coming along today. Thank you to the Imagine Festival in Belfast for also hosting us, and also the Accidental Theatre for once again being great hosts. And also thank you for watching. You can keep up to date with everything else going on, not just with the local government election, but everything else going on in politics in Northern Ireland on sluggerotoole.com. We'll be back again next month with MBTV. So thank you very much for watching.